Welcome to Writer, a program about and for writers. I'm Rona Brinley, your host, and with me today is Mike Magnuson, a novelist. Mike, you have 2 books out now, The Right Man for the Job and The Fire Gospel. But before we talk about your books, I want to ask you a little bit about the process of your writing. You teach creative writing, so you must believe that you can be taught to write. Is that true?
Absolutely, yeah.
Who taught you to write?
Well, I had a variety of teachers like everybody else has, you know, but I studied for a while when I lived in Columbus, Ohio, with Lee K. Abbott, who's a pretty well-known short story writer, and he spent a lot of time talking to me about mechanical ways to learn how to write, which is you could look at a sentence and break it down into its grammatical elements and see what parts of the sentences or what parts of the sentence are revealing character, you know, showing how the human beings who are living in the fiction are existing at that given moment in time. And I believe that before I studied with him, I really was just kind of writing kind of all intuitively. I mean, it wasn't that I couldn't write at all, but I mean, I wasn't thinking about what I was doing in terms of the language and how the language is built. And he showed me how to do that. And, you know, since I in turn have become a teacher now, I use things that he taught me, but I branched out into other ways of talking, how to build sentences and character and do dialogue and this sorts of rough and tumble stuff that constitutes fiction writing, you know.
Can anybody learn how to write, or is it partly an innate gift?
Well, I suppose it's partly an innate gift. But I think a lot of times what happens in a university is you have a student who on the surface seems like a mediocre young writer. And a lot of times somebody who's teaching the student will ignore them because they're not brilliant right when they look at them. And I believe that it's the mediocre writer who has potential that can be developed into somebody great. Because, I mean, it takes an enormous commitment to be a writer, and it takes a lot of hours at the screen and so forth. But moreover, it needs somebody telling you that if you're going to put in this commitment, you will succeed at it. And a lot more people can write than you'd ever imagine. I really believe it's just a career possibility people don't consider.
What was the best advice you got that helped you become a successful writer?
I guess, you know, read. No, I guess it's a 3-part thing. You need to read all the time, and not just read books that are coming out this week, but go back and read your classics and those things. And you have to develop a regular routine of writing where you sit down and preferably 3 to 4 hours every day. You know, just like as if you were a concert pianist, you need to practice that much. And lastly, you need to spend a lot of time looking at people and what they're doing. You know, there are certain kind of people who will sit there and tap their nose like that, right? And that says something about who they are, right? And other people will kind of stare at you in a dispassionate way. And you have to try to come up with a way to generalize people's movements into prose. So it's kind of a 3-part thing. It takes a lot of effort. You just sort of have to be single-minded about it.
So let's start with the reading part then. Who do you read that you think helps you develop your craft?
Well, you know, I believe Shakespeare. I say that with kind of a twinkle in my eye, because you probably think I'm pulling your leg.
No, I believe you.
It's true. I think Shakespeare, Chaucer, to start out with. I think I like the Russians a great deal, particularly Dostoevsky. I went ape over Dostoevsky at one point and read everything. Proust was a great influence on me, and Beckett. And more recently, I thought Flannery O'Connor really helped me out a lot, because a lot of what I originally was interested in writing was maybe more poetic and less scene and story oriented. And I started reading a lot of Flannery O'Connor and Harry Crews and people who have a real solid, straight-ahead narrative where nothing happens that isn't borne out by an action and so forth. I mean, and once I read those people, I was able to, I think, tell a story in novel form better than I could before. But I read all the time, and I'm sort of, it doesn't matter to me what it is.
Well, you brought up Harry Crews, which is interesting because when I read your works, I see you almost as a Southern writer writing about the Midwest.
Right.
Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. In fact, you know, I'm from Wisconsin, and you know, I'm real proud of coming from Wisconsin and all that. But one thing that Wisconsin lacks, I believe, is an indigenous literature. There isn't Wisconsin Gothic, for instance, which is what I would say that I am. I'm a Wisconsin Gothic writer, meaning I have exaggerated rural characters doing things that may not normally happen in everyday life. But Wisconsin is largely a rural state where largely people, they're getting by, but they don't have a lot of money. There are harsh living conditions. And this is not all that different from, say, the South Georgia of Harry Crews. I believe in sensibility. I mean, these are people that are living off the land and trying to get by the best they can. And I found in my reading that I was just really attracted, at least in American literature, to certain elements of Southern fiction. Faulkner, of course, yeah, was real fascinated by him, and Harry Crews, because they are my people. You know, I'm not kidding. In Wisconsin, there are people driving around in the back roads with Confederate flags and their pickup trucks, right, and shotguns. I mean, you know, our dialect's obviously different. You can hear me, you know. Right. I talk like a dumb Swede, but that doesn't mean I don't think like I'm.
But there's still that sense, to me, there seems to be still that sense of place and the right, interesting characters and the good story that is the Southern tradition. Yeah, it has to do with being willing to talk about place. There are writers who don't like to do that, particularly in the short story, where it doesn't matter what city the story's taking place in or what restaurant they're sitting in. But I mean, where I'm from, I mean, we're real proud of being from Wisconsin. I mean, it's an honor. I mean, people think we're goofy because we wear cheese heads and stuff, but I mean, we're proud of that. And well, you should be. So when you watch people going like this, and some people tapping their nose, and some people folding their arms, does that mean you know these people? Do you know Gunnar and Leonard and Grady? Are these people in your books that you know from your life?
I think, or close enough. I mean, certainly my characters, I mean, they're not modeled after an actual human being, but in some cases it comes pretty close. But mostly, you know, my characters are composites of folks that I knew when I worked in various jobs and people that I see even today. In the Fire Gospels, there are a character or two that are based after folks I know at the university. You know,
will they recognize themselves?
Oh, maybe, if they're inclined to read what I write, which they probably aren't inclined to do.
So do you tell people the age-old advice, write about what you know? Absolutely,
absolutely. And you know, for instance, I'm teaching at the University of Florida now, and a lot of the students at the University of Florida come up to Gainesville from Miami, and then they write all their short stories about some, you know, Hoboken, New Jersey or something. And I think, why would you do that? You know the streets of Miami, you've been there, you know how it smells and what the water tastes like, and that's who we are.
Right.
And I think that's important to do. Now, I mean, there's something to be said for the imagination, you know, that it's nice to pretend that, say, you're a, you know, 17th century explorer in the Arctic or something. I mean, that's good. I mean, I don't say not to do that, but I think particularly in the beginning of a writer's career and in a writer's education, it's best to work with the things that you're most closely familiar with, because writing's all in the details, and what you know compendiously, which is the life around you, you can translate better into the details of your prose.
Do these characters take on a life of their own once you start, or do you know where the book is going?
Well, and I like to say, normally, this is the first time I'm going to say it the other way. Usually I'll say, yeah, I know the end. It's like I'm really Mozart, and I just close my eyes and type the thing out, and it's done. But it takes a life of its own. It sure does. I mean, I think when I start to work on a novel, I have a general outline of what's going to happen. But what you can't account for when you're writing a novel is what your mood is going to be on a given day you sit down to write, and just how sentences pop out of you. It sounds crazy, but there's a real correlation, I think, between playing, say, jazz piano and writing sentences. You know, where you know, the jazz pianist has an understanding of the chord structure and harmony and so forth. And they know this, but when they're playing, maybe they're not thinking about it consciously. They're just letting, you know, it's just happening because it's the way they express themselves. The same thing is true with the sentence. You can know the grammar up and down, but still all of a sudden this thing happens. You know, this little light laser beam goes from your head to your keys, and all of a sudden it's on your screen and you print it out. And you can't account for this. And what happens is in the twists and turns of the sentences or whatever happens, how many cups of coffee you drank before you wrote or whatever. In the twists and turns, you, you come up with sometimes events that you never had foreseen or character traits you hadn't foreseen, and then you have to revise the whole book to fit maybe what happened in a half hour.
So things that happen in your life affect what you're writing.
Oh, you bet.
So in the beginning of the Fire Gospels, when you introduce Leonard and he's reading the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, should we assume that you're reading the Gibbons as you're writing
and
that?
of course, in that case, that was what was going on. I was reading the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, Part 1, and I had Leonard. Leonard was just a gay bartender when I originally wrote the novel, and he was a real comic character, I thought, and I thought that, you know, well, my idea was to put a gay bartender in a working class tavern in northern Wisconsin where there aren't any gay people, and I thought that would be good. But it seemed to me that he was just there as just a clown, and I wanted to give him some kind of a intellectual backdrop where he actually understood something about the world through research. So I gave him the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, you know, and then the numerous riffs in the book go off that.
Yeah, I don't want to give away the ending, but it is a defining piece of information both about him and for the book, so that's what I thought.
Right, but of course the
That's
Decline and
amazing.
Fall of Roman Empire has a lot to do with Christianity spread into the Roman Empire, and the Fire Gospels is pretty much about Christianity, different ways to look at it, I think.
Well, you tackled a pretty hard discussion when you took on Christianity. I mean, the question of faith, some people are going to be offended, obviously. Why did you decide to tackle such a difficult question? I mean, basically, you have an evangelical weatherman in here.
Right, I have an evangelical weatherman. Faith does not disturb me at all. On the other hand, and I feel bashful to say it almost, is that, you know, I am not a believer in God. I am an atheist, and it's to say that to somebody, people look at you like, how can you think that? You know, and I understand that, and I don't feel persecuted or anything. It's just a point of fact that that's what I am. But yet if you look at literature and if you look at culture, I mean, religion is everything to a culture, I think. People's faith is the underpinning for the way they look at other people and what their moral, you know, behaviors are going to be like and so forth. And I wanted to write a book where I put people in a crisis situation where they had to approach their faith in one way or another. And you know, whether or not I believe or not believe, people in my book come to believe in Christ. And in fact, God himself intervenes in the novel. I mean, God is a character, you know, and maybe a lightning bolt will strike right now for me doing that. But I think literature, without the religious question going through it, at least on some level, is maybe not often as strong as it should be. Now, admittedly, the Fire Gospels, it's over the top. I mean, I hammer on religion every sentence. But I needed to do it. I needed to approach it. And I didn't come to Christ through it.
Well, both of your books are basically about the working class. These are normal Joe Schmo people, or maybe not so normal Joe Schmo people, facing sometimes extraordinary kind of situations or making them more interesting. And you've been praised for writing about the working class.
Mm-hmm.
Is that an area that you think has been ignored in literature that needs some more attention or lacks understanding?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's been ignored. My assessment of readers and writers, and this is not to their detriment at all, is that it's a middle-class pastime, largely. And I don't think it necessarily should have to be. I think reading should be for everybody. But you read books, lots of the popular fictions, everybody's making a great deal of money, and they're, say, running a modeling agency, you know, in New York City.
Right.
And I don't know if that's generally the lives of the people who are reading these books. People have jobs. They all do. And we're sad that we have to go to work, some of us. Me in particular, I hate it, you know. But why is it then that the jobs and the principal part of our life, which it truly is not rendered in fiction? This always seems really peculiar to me. You read novels and everything happens on the weekend off from work. It doesn't happen while they're at work. God, people are at work 70 hours a week. That's more than they, you know, pat their children on the head.
Well, who do you want to be reading your books then? Is it written for a different audience than,
Yeah, I mean, ideally,
Christians?
I wish people with jobs would read my book, you know. I mean, it's much harder for the people who ideally I think should be reading my book to be able to afford, say, a hardcover, but in paperback they can afford it. And in the case of The Right Man for the Job, I got it to all different types of folks, people who worked at convenience stores and factories and, you know, appliance stores and stuff like that, and they all could read it. And it's literary fiction, and and there's a lyrical edge to it and so forth. But they understood what I was talking about. You know, and I think the Fire Gospels, although it's far more complicated, I think they can understand it too, because at the center of the whole thing, you know, there's a maintenance man. And we all do maintenance in one way or another. We're all there.
Both of your books have a dark side to them, I think it's fair to say. You would say that, but they're also funny.
Right.
In a certain way. How do you combine being sort of dark and comical, or do you think those things just naturally go together?
Well, clearly they naturally go together, and I think part of the dark element of my writing comes from I use violence in judicious locations, and I think of my own life, and this may have happened to you too, where you're so happy, everything is just so great, and you're running around in your backyard, and all of a sudden you trip over the hose and fall into your, you know, picnic table, and you got a cut on your head or something.
Right.
And all of a sudden all that happiness is gone just like that. But then 3 days later, when you look back at tripping over the hose, you go, oh, that was pretty funny, wasn't it? Yeah, you should have seen him. He flew right in the air, you know. And we laugh about that. And I think that's how our lives are. I mean, we got to laugh, we do. But probably underneath laughing and enjoying ourselves, there's a lot of grimness to the world. People are getting shot out there on the streets, and people are getting hit. I mean, and that's inescapable. We have to approach that.
You said that you like to think of yourself as a literary author, and both of your books are published by Harper. Mm-hmm. Your second book is a new imprint, the Harper Flamingo imprint, which is a more literary section now of HarperCollins. I guess one question is, how did you get, I mean, first crack out of the box here, you get published by a rather major publisher. How did that happen?
Well, it was a luck of the draw thing. You know, I got an agent, and she contacted my editor at HarperCollins, and he bought the book. And I think I like to be considered literary, probably, because, I mean, I do pay a lot of attention to the language in my writing. I think that factors big into it. But I don't know why it necessarily happened to me. I mean, I'm not going to tell you that all the books were great. I could really write, but it didn't go that way. There's a lot of manuscripts come over the transom at a good publishing house, and I've got a lucky pick. I'm trying to make good of it, work hard.
What difference do you think it will make of this new imprint? Do you think being a more literary imprint will affect who your audience is or your reputation in any way?
I'm hoping so. I'm hoping so. I mean, a literary reputation is pretty effective in certain areas. For instance, New York City, where all the literary people are, you know. I mean, if you can impress all those folks, then they'll push your book harder, and maybe it'll trickle down to the small stores around the country. You know, because one of the things that happens, I'm sure, in the book industry is that there are certain books that are promoted to be sold to people who are selling books. This is what happens in chain stores. You know, the companies say, well, look, this book is going to sell. Go ahead and sell it for us, you know. And you have to convince, by getting a literary reputation, maybe I can convince those in the know to say I'm okay.
Right. But with the changes that are happening, since you brought that up in the publishing industry and the book business, do you think it's harder to get published or easier?
I think it's going to be harder and harder. I've been reading some things about this lately, that they're saying that what's happening with publishing is, I can't remember the name of this German publishing firm that just bought out Random House. Right? I mean, it's going to be such a large thing that they're going to want to continue to make money. These are businesses designed to make profits. So you have to have your heavy hitters making money all the time. Now, what about somebody who's 25 and has a novel and maybe will sell 4,000 copies? You know, I think that book should be published. I think people should have a chance to buy it. But maybe business is going to stay in the way of it, you know. And I think something like Harper Flamingo, or like the Vintage Contemporary line, I think something like that at least allows for a place where literature can still be published by major houses instead of university presses, and maybe people will pay attention to it because of that.
Well, we've talked sort of about how you write and what you write. I guess another question would be, why do you write? If you weren't getting published, would you still be writing?
That's an odd question. I suspect so. Probably not with the... I certainly wouldn't be able to put the same amount of time into it. You know, I mean, I worked for years before The Right Man for the Job came out. I worked in the factory for 8 years and did all kind of odd jobs, and I wrote all the time during this period. But if you're working 60 hours a week, say jackhammering up people's basements, you know, you're not going to be as fresh and energetic to come home and write lyric prose for 4 hours. I suspect I'd have stuck with it, though. It seemed to me that I had like when I was in high school, I wanted to grow up and be a drummer or something like this, and I was really possessed with that, and I gave it up. And I when I took up writing, I just decided that I would never give it up, no matter what.
Well, do you think the process of writing and being published has improved your writing? Has your writing been improving lately? Or?
Absolutely. And part of this is the great secret to the publishing formula is if you have a good editor, he can help you. My editor he's magnificent with this stuff. I mean, I can come up with some material, right? But then I can show him the pages, and it's like a football coach or something. He says, "Look, you have got to do this, and you know, what you're really trying to say is this. Now stay on that line and don't deviate." And then I think that alone has improved my writing 100 times. Just having one of the greatest editors in the country just lay the wood to me. He's mean too, you know, and I appreciate that, you know, because he wants he's not giving me incisive criticism to hurt me, you know. He wants me to do the best that I possibly can.
Who's the first person who reads your manuscript?
When it first comes out of the can?
When it comes off the computer, you print it out.
Well, I work, I have a little writing group with some friends. We get together once a month and look at each other's manuscripts, and we kind of leave it as a private thing. We leave it at that. And then when the book's done, then I'll give it to the folks at HarperCollins. And
how do you deal with the criticism? Are you kind to each other, or is it difficult?
Well, in a university writing workshop setting, the criticism can be very mean because people are in competition with each other. When you have friends working together, the goal is let's all 4 of us publish a book. So it's real, you know, and we're all men too, and it's remarkably networking and nurturing. It really is. Men are capable of incredible friendliness. And stuff,
oh, well, we're all happy to hear that, right? Absolutely. Do you ever get writer's block?
Oh, all the time. Yeah, recently in particular, I've had a hard time. I've been stopping and starting on this novel I'm working on called Icelander's Daughter, which is it's a true Icelandic epic, patterned after kind of like Njál's saga or something like that. And it's a long story about a guy who kidnaps his daughter when she's 1 month old up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and comes down here to the swamps with her and gets away with the crime. And she grows up to be the greatest guitar player ever to come out of North Florida. And I mean, I think the story is really amusing. I really like it, but to articulate it has just been killing me. And I've been doing things where I'll work for 2 weeks and then I won't do anything. And I got a vegetable garden and I'm out putzing around with my dirt instead of writing.
But interestingly, this is still, you're bringing what you know into play. When you first started, I thought, wow, what has that got to do with what you know? But you're back in the Midwest and in Florida.
Right, right.
These are the places.
Yeah, and I'm also quite possessed with music, so I have to, and I can't play guitar very well, but I always wanted to be like the virtuoso guitarist. So I thought I'd create a woman that would be the greatest one.
So as we come to the end of this conversation, unfortunately, let me ask you, what would you like to tell people who are out there listening to you who want to be inspired? What would be your one piece of advice to them if they want to become a successful writer?
Well, certainly it can be done. Like I said at the beginning of our conversation, that if you commit yourself to reading and working hard and watching people, and you don't give up and you don't allow yourself to stop after your first short story's been rejected by the New Yorker or something like that, keep going and it can happen. I'm certain that if I was able to publish, that most people can. Because I mean, hell, I could barely read a book when I was 18.
Well, you've come a long way, and we appreciated it. And thank you for your time and all your good words of wisdom.
I appreciate it.
And thank you for joining us on Writer to Writer.